Amid the splendor of Elizabeth and England, Queen Elizabeth I represented sovereignty, sharp intellect, and the cultivated allure of royalty. Her public persona was carefully crafted as the eternal virgin monarch, a supporter of the arts, and the living symbol of national pride. History celebrates her brilliant court, the triumph over the Spanish Armada, and England's emergence as a Protestant powerhouse. However, beneath this celebrated legacy, under layers of silk adorned with pearls and powdered grace, was a ruler motivated by fear, vanity, and an exacting control over how she was perceived. At a time when cleanliness was more about ritual than hygiene, Queen Elizabeth I's personal grooming habits, judged by today's standards, appear astonishing. These habits did not just reflect her time, but were a deliberate part of her political image. In an era where rulers were expected to seem less human and more idealized, the Queen nurtured a body untouched by water or the passage of time. Now we explore 5 of the most peculiar and insightful hygiene practices connected to Elizabeth I. Each reveals the extremes she endured to keep her legend alive even as her physical self deteriorated. Queen Elizabeth I's glittering court sparkled with wit, poetry, and magnificence. Yet her craving for sugar was perhaps the most ironic aspect of her reign. At a time when refined sugar was scarce and expensive, stored like precious gems in chests, Elizabeth enjoyed it with regal indulgence. Elizabeth had a deep fondness for candied violets, sugar-coated marzipan, preserved fruits, and a variety of intricate sweets served at her royal court. To hold sugar was to hold influence, and she indulged in it as though she were consuming the growing riches of England itself. Sadly, dental care in the 16th century was rudimentary and often completely mistaken. The Queen reportedly applied a sweetened mixture of sugar and herbs to clean her teeth. Instead of preserving her smile, this approach hastened tooth decay. Harsh powders combined with sugar only wore away the enamel and encouraged rot. By the year 1590, foreign diplomats observed that Elizabeth's teeth had turned black, and many had fallen out completely. Her breath, according to the herbalist John Gerard, was unpleasant enough to make those around her uncomfortable. Some even found it hard to understand her speech because of her missing teeth. Yet she stubbornly rejected the painful tooth extractions recommended by her doctors. On one occasion, a courtier underwent a tooth removal right in front of her to demonstrate that the procedure was survivable. What is even more fascinating is the influence her deteriorating smile had. Noblewomen at her court began darkening their own teeth to imitate her look. Using soot and charcoal, the trend of blackened teeth arose not from notions of beauty, but as a sign of wealth and emulation of the Queen. In the social order of Tudor England, even visible decay could be seen as a status symbol. Ambitious as it was to the Queen, among the many sayings linked to Queen Elizabeth I, one of the most memorable is, "I bathe once a month, whether I need it or not." Although its truthfulness is still questioned, it reflects the mindset of a time that saw water not as a purifier, but as a danger. Bathing often was thought to cause sickness, disturb the body's balance, and expose one to harmful air or illnesses believed to spread this way. For Elizabeth, bathing was not a daily habit. Rather, she adhered to a routine that involved changing her linen shifts, which were undergarments worn directly on the skin, frequently and sometimes several times throughout the day. These clothes were believed to pull out impurities and keep the body clean by simple contact. To those living at the time, this approach was seen as enough and even praiseworthy. Instead of using soap and water, Elizabeth preferred rose water, vinegar rinses, and complex herbal mixtures prepared by her apothecaries. These substances were gently applied by her attendants, meant not only to refresh but also to protect since running water was missing. Such methods were considered the safest and most reliable way to keep proper hygiene. Her palaces did not have plumbing. When bathing took place, it was a complex process involving wooden tubs, hot water brought in buckets, and a minimum of 3 servants. The task was so demanding that fully immersing in water became a rare event. Rare luxury required preparation with the same meticulous care as a grand coronation. Despite this, Elizabeth was considered clean by the standards of her era. She possessed hundreds of dresses, surrounded herself with scented gloves and handkerchiefs, and insisted that every aspect of her appearance remain flawless. However, this was not the kind of cleanliness related to hygiene. It was cleanliness rooted in illusion. The queen did not avoid bathing out of neglect. Instead, she shunned it because water threatened to dismantle the perfect image she crafted for the world. Elizabeth's face is among the most iconic in history. Pale and smooth, almost ghostly, it represented more than just cosmetic artistry. It was a deliberate strategy. In a time when pale skin signified nobility and divine favor, the queen used makeup as both a protective barrier from criticism and a mark of her authority. Her preferred cosmetic was Venetian cerus, a mixture of white lead and vinegar. This poisonous blend gave the impression of perfect skin while quietly damaging it. Over time, the substance ate away at her face, causing scars, lesions, and forcing her to apply increasingly thick layers. Adding to the harm was her choice of lip color, often made from cinnabar or vermilion, both containing mercury. This toxic pigment entered her bloodstream, harming her health, intensifying mood swings, and producing neurological symptoms typical of mercury poisoning. Yet she endured all of this. Why? Because her appearance was not solely her own. It represented the entire kingdom. Elizabeth used her looks to command attention, to intimidate her opponents, and to defy the passage of time. She insisted that no portraits capture her in natural lighting. Artists were instructed to follow strict, idealized patterns, recycling favored features from earlier images. In her later years, her face became almost mask-like, said to be so delicate that any touch might cause it to crumble. Scholars argue about whether she was aware of the risks posed by her makeup. Yet one thing is clear. She was convinced her appearance had to stay flawless, even if her body deteriorated underneath. She rarely washed her face, since cleansing it would have removed the mask and shattered the legend of Gloriana, the Virgin Queen. Behind the richly woven tapestries and the gold-leafed ceilings of Elizabeth's residences, an uncomfortable reality was hidden. There was absolutely no plumbing. Despite her grandeur, Queen Elizabeth I lived in conditions that were more medieval than modern. The palaces she called home, such as Hampton Court and Richmond Palace, lacked toilets, sewage systems, and any form of running water. Waste disposal relied on methods that had barely evolved since the Middle Ages. Her personal private toilet, known as a close stool, was an elegant padded chair with a hole where a ceramic chamber pot was placed beneath it. This pot had to be emptied, cleaned, and scented several times daily, not by unknown servants, but by one of the highest-ranking and most trusted courtiers, the groom of the... Despite its title, the groom of the stool was far from a mere servant, and instead was a nobleman of significant rank, chosen for his trustworthiness and loyalty. He enjoyed unparalleled access to the Queen during her most intimate moments, assisting her with dressing, personal hygiene, and sometimes even confidential political conversations. Holding the position of groom of the stool was both a prestigious honor and a key role of influence within the royal court. Outside the Queen's private chambers, the reality of managing waste was far less glamorous. The entire palace relied on chamber pots and cesspools for sanitation. Servants, often known as gong farmers or night soilmen, performed the unpleasant task of emptying waste under the cover of night. They struggled with heavy buckets through narrow passageways, down staircases, and across courtyards, finally dumping the contents into designated trenches or pits. These cesspools, located just beyond palace walls or beneath some rooms, were foul-smelling, disease-ridden, and frequently filled beyond capacity. The constant odor was a persistent problem in court life. To counteract the unpleasant smells, herbs like lavender, rosemary, and sweet marjoram were scattered on floors or burned as incense. Floors were covered with rushes perfumed with oils, yet these coverings were seldom replaced, allowing layers of dirt, hair, leftover food, and unseen filth to accumulate beneath. Even the Queen planned her movements carefully to avoid unpleasant odors, often traveling between royal residences not only to fulfill political duties, but also to escape the less pleasant realities of palace life. Not only was plumbing essential for practical reasons, but it also helped prevent the unavoidable accumulation of waste. Without a proper water system, no level of refinement could maintain a palace's freshness for an extended period. The longer the royal court remained in one place, the more unbearable the odors and the worsening health conditions became. Despite all its grandeur, Elizabeth's court was full of contradictions where fragrances hid decay, where luxurious velvet seats concealed chamber pots, and where the most powerful woman in the kingdom coexisted with the persistent scent of human presence. To truly grasp Queen Elizabeth I's hygiene routines, one must first recognize her desire for control. Every aspect of her appearance, from the powdered complexion to the gloved hands, was not about beauty, but about asserting authority. Nowhere was this clearer than in her deliberate avoidance of bathing. In the Tudor period, water was not only inconvenient, but also deeply personal. To bathe meant to expose the body, soften the skin, and open oneself to disease and weakness. Elizabeth, having witnessed the downfall of vulnerable women, including her mother, Anne Boleyn, could not allow herself to appear delicate. Instead of washing, Elizabeth cloaked herself in a daily ceremony of scented protection. She surrounded herself with personalized mixtures crafted in the palace's still rooms. Ingredients like lavender, rose, orris root, cloves, and rosemary were steeped in vinegar or alcohol. These preparations were never intended to cleanse dirt, but to conceal odors and fortify her image of invincibility. Each day she lightly applied these aromatic elixirs, creating a barrier of scent that highlighted her power and shielded her from the fragile human vulnerabilities she so carefully rejected. A touch of rose water on the wrists, a gentle spritz behind the ears, and Elizabeth would move gracefully through her court, leaving behind not sweat, but a deliberately crafted atmosphere. She carried scented pomanders, ornamental orb-shaped objects filled with resins and herbs, hidden within her bodice or fastened to her belt. Whenever unpleasant odors became too strong, she would simply raise them to her nose and inhale the carefully curated purity. These items were practical yet symbolic. They marked her separation from the ordinary world where cleanliness was maintained by water and soap. For Elizabeth, fragrance was more than a mere preference. It acted as a barrier. Even her attire played a part in this sensory approach. Her gloves were infused with perfume, and her handkerchiefs were embroidered and soaked in fragrant oils. The Queen's elaborate layered clothing both concealed her body and preserved its scent. She was known to present perfumed gloves to her favored courtiers, a way to share her controlled aroma with others, never revealing the original source. Hair washing was out of the question. Her hair, often hidden beneath intricately styled wigs, was powdered and stiffened with solutions of sugar water or egg whites. As her natural hair began to thin with age and from exposure to lead poisoning, she wore auburn wigs meticulously scented and curled to perfection. Yet beneath all the lavender and powder, Elizabeth's body showed signs of aging. Her skin, damaged by years of using lead-based cosmetics, became delicate and scarred. Whispered rumors circulated about her declining health and the toll of beauty practices on her appearance. Open wounds, peeling skin, and a face that could no longer tolerate any touch. Yet she never gave up her routines. Instead, she intensified them. Over time, Elizabeth grew more secretive, even suspicious. She declined to sit for portraits unless the painting adhered to exact standards. No wrinkles, no evidence of aging. Mirrors were banned from her private chambers. Some rumors suggested she employed a chambermaid whose only task was to discreetly reapply powder to her shoulders when no one was around. The Queen's mask had to remain flawless, not even in solitude. Avoiding bathing was not due to ignorance or neglect. It was a conscious choice because it represented too much truth. A bath would uncover the body's frailty and decay. It might wash away the powder that protected her. It would reveal Elizabeth as mortal. Throughout her reign, she had worked hard to convince everyone she was something beyond ordinary. In the twilight of her life, Elizabeth carried a scented walking cane, which she lifted carefully when passing by particularly foul-smelling courtiers. This was not merely to avoid discomfort. It was a subtle display, a reminder of the divide between ruler and subject. Her body ceased to belong to herself alone. It became a symbol of the monarchy. For Elizabeth, cleanliness was not about hygiene. It was about maintaining a certain image. An image was everything. Queen Elizabeth I is remembered as one of the most legendary rulers, not because she was flawless, but because she grasped more clearly than anyone the influence of illusion. Her personal hygiene practices were no coincidence. They were deeply embedded in a culture that linked cleanliness with calmness, ritual with control, and appearance with identity. To bathe frequently meant risking the facade, and Elizabeth could never permit it to falter. Therefore, she dusted herself with powder, applied fragrances, and struck poses, thereby transforming her image into something grander than reality, perhaps not freshly washed, but undeniably memorable. Within the royal court of Elizabeth I, cleanliness was about much more than soap and water. It was a vital component of survival.